From our studio in central London is Kristyan Benedict, a campaigns manager for Syria at Amnesty International UK. Thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. Amnesty has a long list of questions, a checklist if you like, that it would like the government to ask before providing any arms to Syrian opposition groups. Just take us through some of your main concerns.
That's absolutely right. Amnesty for a long time now have been calling on any government, actually, not just the UK, that may be considering supplying arms to armed opposition groups within Syria, to be absolutely clear that what are the adequate safeguards that they are saying they could put in place. We've heard the Foreign Secretary say that safeguards would be in place. They need to spell those out a little bit more. How can they be sure that any arms that are transferred won't be used by the opposition to commit human rights abuses? How can they be sure that those arms won't be transferred or stolen even by force by what we would call more undesirable groups? There's other wider questions as well around what exactly would be the mechanism to ensure that the weapons stayed with any potential end user. Do those potential end users, i.e. these armed opposition groups, know what their responsibilities are under international human rights law and international humanitarian law, including if any of their members committed abuses?
What dialogue have you had with the government specifically on this, and what has the response been?
We do talk with the Foreign Office and other governments, of course. So they and France are the most active on this arming issue, and they assure us that there are safeguards that will be in place. What we're saying is they need to spell those out in much more detail. It's not enough just to say there will be safeguards and this will be compliant with international law. They have to go into a lot of detail. What is the exact mechanism to ensure that these arms will not be used to commit human rights abuses? How do they know that with arms going in potentially to one party, that more arms will not go to the Syrian government's side as well? So there's still a lot of unanswered questions which the UK government and others could do a lot more to expand on.
And Kristyan, in terms of Amnesty International's work in Syria itself, what evidence have you been able to gather or document of arms being passed between the various factions of the opposition? What evidence do you have of human rights abuses by opposition forces?
Well, you know, Amnesty's been working on Syria for decades, but if you just look at even in the past few months, we issued a major report back in mid-March on opposition by the armed opposition groups. Obviously, we're looking at Syria in totality. It's quite clear that the Syrian government are committing the vast majority of the human rights violations, and no weapons should be going to them. That's absolutely clear. But abuses have been happening by the opposition, whether it's extrajudicial executions, whether it's torture, and it's not enough for the head of the Free Syrian Army or the leadership within the Syrian opposition coalition to just be condemning abuses by armed groups. They need to be doing a lot more, and this is what we're saying to the UK government and others, that it's not enough just to take on board assurances from the opposition. They need to be explaining in detail what is the mechanism to prevent any arms supplied from being used to commit human rights abuses. And I'd go a little bit further. Who in particular are the armed groups they are talking about? It's not enough just to talk about the armed opposition. There are multiple armed groups working with different methods and means, different tactics. Some of them have committed human rights abuses, so a lot more detail needs to come from the UK government on this.
So as things stand, Kristyan, would Amnesty International not support any arming of the opposition forces, despite the fact that they say they are, vastly, their arms are vastly inferior to what the Syrian government has?
We certainly wouldn't support any arms going to groups where there's a likelihood that that group would use them to commit human rights abuses, or that group would transfer those weapons to another group that is likely to use human rights abuses.
But you would if there were safeguards, is that what you're implying?
Well, we're not taking a position on whether arms go in or not to the armed opposition, other than to say that the mechanisms need to be in place for conventional weapons to these different armed opposition groups. At the moment, we're not hearing enough from the UK government or the French government or other governments who are pro-arming as to what these assurances should be. So we're a long way away from even that question of whether arms would be going to opposition groups. We need to know what the mechanisms are in place and what the structure to ensure that there would be accountability if any of those weapons were used to commit human rights abuses.
Kristyan Benedict from Amnesty International UK, thank you very much indeed for your time.